There's a row of perennials behind my barn that I've been trying to kill for 31 years. Dug them up, smothered them with cardboard and black plastic, burned the soil with a propane torch when I was younger and angrier. They come back every April the way certain memories do, uninvited and stubborn. I'm Walt Holloway, fourth-generation orchardist out of northern Vermont, and what I planted in my first real garden back in 1985 still haunts every spring. 12 perennials I bought from a glossy catalog with promises printed in cursive. 12 plants the garden industry sold to a hopeful young man who didn't know any better. Now, 67 years old, I'm here to tell you the truth: those catalogs will never print. What I'm about to share contradicts almost every plant label you've ever read at a big box garden center. I'm sharing it anyway because I've buried more failed perennials than most folks will ever own, and because nobody warned me when it mattered. The very first plant on this list is the one I planted right by my back porch in May of 1985. The nursery tag called it a pretty variegated ground cover. It is still there. It has eaten 3 flower beds, undermined a stone walkway, and outlived my wife. That's not gardening, that's gambling with a price tag. And the house always wins. By the end of this video, you'll know which 12 perennials to refuse, no matter how charming they look in the spring catalog. Before we go any further, drop your Oosta zone in the comments. Zone 4B here in Vermont. I want to know what climate you're gardening in, because some of the plants I regret are even worse in warmer zones. And a few are slightly less aggressive in places where winter does the work for you. If this is your first garden, or your first big perennial bed, that information matters more than the price tag on the plant. And Heritage Sprouts, if you've already made any of these 12 mistakes, hit subscribe so I can spare you from the next 9. Here is what every first-time gardener needs to understand. The plants sold at the front of a garden center are the ones the store can grow cheaply and ship reliably. That has very little to do with whether they belong in your yard. I taught horticulture for 22 years, and the most common question I got from former students wasn't how to grow something. It was how to kill something they'd already planted. By the time you regret a perennial, the roots are already deeper than your shovel. The 12 plants I'm about to list share 3 traits. First, they spread underground through rhizomes, runners, or stolons that you cannot fully dig out. Second, they tolerate neglect, which sounds like a virtue until you realize neglect is also what you give your worst enemies. Third, they were marketed with words like vigorous, spreading, or low maintenance. Those are catalog code words for trouble. The plant doesn't read the label, it reads the soil. And once it's in your soil, it has plans. Number 12 on this list is the one I haven't been able to kill in 40 winters. We'll get there. Bishop's weed, also called goutweed, snow on the mountain, or ground elder. Botanical name Aegopodium podagraria, often sold as the variegated cultivar with cream-edged leaves. Oosta zones 3 through 9. It will grow in full sun, part shade, deep shade, dry soil, wet soil, sand, clay, and the cracks in your driveway. I planted 3 small pots of it in May of 1985 along the foundation of my back porch. The catalog called it a charming variegated ground cover for difficult sites. It does indeed cover the ground. It also covers the bed next to it, the lawn next to that, and eventually the strip of soil under the porch boards where nothing else can reach. By 1991, my variegated bishop's weed had crossed a gravel path and was advancing on my Rosie's herb spiral. By 2003, I gave up on the herb spiral entirely. The reason it cannot be eradicated is the root system. Every fragment of rhizome you leave behind becomes a new plant. A piece the size of your fingernail will grow back. I have dug down 2 feet with a flat shovel, sifted soil by hand for an entire weekend, and watched it return the following spring as if I had done nothing. My honest opinion, if you see this plant for sale at a nursery, you should turn around and shop somewhere else. Any garden center still selling Aegopodium podagraria in 2026 either does not know what they are stocking or does not care. Both possibilities are reasons to take your money elsewhere. The University of Vermont Extension lists it as invasive. The state of Massachusetts has prohibited its sale outright. If you already have it, your best path is patience. Cover the area with heavy cardboard and 6 inches of mulch for 2 full seasons. Do not till, do not dig. Tilling and digging is exactly how it spreads. Smother it, and accept that you will be smothering it for a long time. Mint, peppermint, spearmint, chocolate mint, apple mint, mojito mint, every mint they sell at every farmer's market every Saturday from now until the heat death of the universe. Botanical name mentha, with the species varying. Oosta zones 3 through 11. Full sun, part shade, moist soil, it will grow. Here is the only correct way to plant mint: in a container, with no drainage holes touching open soil, on a hard surface like a patio stone. Not in the ground, not in a raised bed, not with a barrier dug down 12 inches because the runners go 18. Rosie planted a single peppermint slip in our kitchen herb bed in the summer of 1986. She had read in a magazine that mint deterred ants from the foundation. The ants are still here. The mint is also still here. 40 winters later, I find runners of that original peppermint 30 feet from where she planted it, surfacing through the lawn, the gravel, the seam between the foundation and the concrete walk. The honest truth is that mint is a wonderful plant in a pot and a slow-motion catastrophe in the ground. The runners travel laterally through the top 6 inches of soil. They send up new shoots wherever they find light. By the time you notice you have a problem, the mint has already colonized an area larger than the original planting by a factor of 10. If you already have mint loose in your garden, the recovery is mechanical. Mow it short every 2 weeks for an entire growing season. Do this for 2 years. Eventually, the rhizomes exhaust their reserves and the colony weakens. You will not eliminate it, you will manage it. The University of Vermont herb specialist I worked with for years used to say mint is not a plant, it is a population. Treat it accordingly. Bee balm, specifically the red species, Monarda didyma, zones 4 through 9, full sun, moist, well-drained soil, sold as a pollinator favorite, and indeed the hummingbirds do love it. The problem is not the hummingbirds. The problem is the powdery mildew and the rhizomatous spread. I planted 3 Monarda didyma Cambridge scarlet in my pollinator border in 1992. By the end of August, every leaf was coated in white fungal dust. By 1995, the plants had spread sideways into a clumping mat that crowded out the Rudbeckia, the Echinacea, and the catmint I had planted in the same bed. The center of the original clumps had died out, the way bee balm's centers always die out, leaving a donut-shaped colony of mildewed foliage that looked terrible from July onward. My opinion on Monarda didyma is harsh and earned. The native straight species spreads aggressively and mildews reliably. The newer mildew-resistant cultivars are better. Mount Cuba Center's trial garden ran a 5-year evaluation and identified specific cultivars worth growing. If you want the hummingbird draw without the regret, look at their trial report and choose a tested cultivar like Jacob Klein or one of the Sugar Buzz series. Do not buy the cheap unnamed red Monarda at the big box store. If you must have bee balm and you already have the wrong one, here is what to do. Dig and divide every 2 years. Discard the dead center and replant only the outer rosettes. Space them 3 feet apart in a location with strong airflow. Cut foliage back by 1/3 in late June to slow the mildew, and accept that even with all of this, the rhizomes will continue to push outward at a rate of about a foot per year. The labels lie because they have to fit on a price tag. The label says pollinator favorite. The label does not say powdery mildew machine. Obedient plant, Physostegia virginiana, zones 3 through 9, full sun to part shade, moist soil tolerated. The common name comes from the curious habit of the individual flowers. If you push a blossom sideways on the stalk, it stays where you pushed it. That is the only thing obedient about this plant. The roots are the opposite of obedient. Physostegia spreads by aggressive underground rhizomes that can travel 4 to 6 feet in a single growing season, sending up new flowering stalks wherever they find soil. The native straight species, which is what most catalogs sell, is one of the most aggressively spreading perennials in commerce. I planted a single quart pot of pink Physostegia in 1989 because the catalog photograph showed a tidy 3-foot clump in a cottage border. By 1992, I had what looked like a small pink hedge running diagonally across 2 beds. By 1996, I had given up that section of the garden entirely and replanted it as a wildflower meadow, because at least in a meadow setting, the spread looks intentional. Heritage sprouts, here's what I want you to understand about plant naming. The garden industry names plants for marketing, not for accuracy. Obedient plant is one of the most spectacular misnomers in the entire nursery trade. If a plant is named for a virtue, obedient plant, self-heal, forget-me-not, read the description very, very carefully. If you already have it, the only way to manage Physostegia is rigorous annual digging. In early spring, before the foliage emerges fully, dig out the perimeter of the colony in a 1-foot ring. Throw the rhizomes in the trash, not the compost. Repeat every spring forever. Some of the named cultivars, like Miss Manners, are reported to be much less aggressive, and Mount Cuba's trials confirmed this. If you want Physostegia in your garden, only buy that cultivar or one with a similar reputation. Never buy the unnamed pink species. Yellow loosestrife, Lysomachia punctata, sometimes called circle flower or spotted loosestrife. Zones 4 through 8, sun to part shade, moist to wet soil. Yellow flowers and whirls up a stalk in early summer. Sold as a low-maintenance perennial for difficult wet sites. It is low maintenance in the same way a kitchen fire is low maintenance. It does not require your attention to spread. Lysomachia punctata sends out underground stolons that travel 2 to 3 feet per season. In moist or wet soil, that rate increases. Within 4 years of a single nursery pot, you can have a colony covering 40 square feet. I want to be clear about my opinion. This plant should not be sold to home gardeners. It is listed as invasive in several northern states. It is listed as a concern by multiple state extension services. The flowers are attractive for about 3 weeks in June. The remaining 49 weeks of the year, you are looking at a slowly expanding green mat that is suppressing everything around it. I planted yellow loosestrife in a low, wet corner of my property in 1994 because nothing else seemed to want that spot. The yellow loosestrife wanted it. By 2001, it had moved from the wet corner up the slope toward a dry slope where it had no business growing, and from there it crossed a mowed path into my asparagus bed. The asparagus bed is older than my second child. I lost a section of that bed to yellow loosestrife and never fully recovered it. Do not be deceived by the close cousin Lysomachia clethroides, the gooseneck loosestrife with white arching spikes. It is equally aggressive. Do not be deceived by Lysomachia ciliata firecracker either. The bronze-purple foliage is striking, but the underground spread is the same problem. Management requires a hard barrier, concrete edging, or a metal landscape edging sunk 12 inches deep, combined with annual root pruning along the perimeter. Most people give up. I gave up. The University of Vermont Extension recommends digging it out completely and not replanting in that location for 2 seasons, which is a polite way of saying the plant wins. Chinese lanterns, Physalis alkakengi, Oostozones 3 through 9, full sun to part shade, average soil, famous for the bright orange papery seed husks in autumn that look like miniature paper lanterns. Catalogs sell it as a charming cottage garden curiosity for fall flower arrangements. I planted 3 nursery pots of Physalis alkakengi in 1988 because Rosie wanted the orange husks for autumn decorations. We got the husks for 2 seasons. We have been getting the runners for 38 years. I've been turning this same soil since Nixon was president, and I have never met a perennial that travels through a garden the way Chinese lantern does. The plant spreads through long, thin underground rhizomes that travel just below the surface. The runners can extend 3 to 4 feet from the parent in a single season. New flowering stalks emerge from every node along the runner. Within 5 years, you have a colony that occupies an area dozens of times larger than the original planting. The leaves resemble tomato leaves, which makes sense. Physalis is in the nightshade family, related to tomatoes, potatoes, and the edible tomatillo. Do not eat the fruits of Physalis alkakengi. The fully ripened orange husks contain a fruit that is mildly toxic in the unripe stage and irritating to many people even when fully ripe. This is not the same plant as the edible ground cherry, Physalis pruinosa. If you want the orange husks for autumn flower arrangements, and I understand the appeal, grow Physalis alkakengi inside a buried bottomless container. A 5-gallon nursery pot with the bottom cut out, sunk in the ground with 2 inches of rim above grade, will hold the colony in place for about 4 years before the runners find a way out. After that, you will be back to digging. The honest assessment is this: the autumn husks are pretty for 1 month. The runners are forever. Buy the orange husks at a farmer's market every September instead. It will cost less than your years of regret. 6 down, 6 to go. We are about to enter the second half, and I will tell you now that plant number 12 on this list is the worst of them all. The one I have actively been trying to remove since 1994. The one that has outlasted 3 different removal strategies and a chemical treatment I am not proud of. Heritage sprouts. If you've ever planted any of the first 6 and lived to regret it, hit the like button so I know you're with me. Drop the worst perennial you ever bought in the comments. I read every one of them, and I learned from your stories the same way you might be learning from mine. Now, plant 7, the one that smelled like heaven and behaved like a nightmare. Lily of the Valley, Convallaria majalis, Oostozones 3 through 8, part shade to full shade, average to moist soil, tiny white bellflowers in May, intensely fragrant, sold as a charming shade ground cover for problem areas under trees. The opinion I hold on Lily of the Valley is that it is one of the most dangerous perennials a beginning gardener can plant. Not because it kills the gardener, but because of what it does to the garden and the children who visit it. Every part of the plant is toxic. The leaves, the flowers, the berries, the rhizomes. The toxin is a cardiac glycoside. Pets and children have been seriously poisoned by it, and pretty much every state poison control extension lists Convallaria majalis among the perennials most often involved in calls. I planted a 40-foot stretch of Convallaria along the shady north side of my house in 1987. The fragrance in May was beautiful. My grandchildren visit that area now under strict supervision because I have not yet completed the removal which I started in 2018. The rhizomes are extensive, dense, and matted. They form a continuous underground network that resists digging. The spread is slow but inexorable, about a foot per year laterally, sometimes more in moist conditions. The colony does not push outward in a tidy front. It sends shoots up through any opening in the canopy of another plant. I have found Lily of the Valley emerging through the crown of a peony, through the middle of a hosta clump, and once through the cracked asphalt of my driveway. If you have it and you want it gone, the process is brutal. Strip the entire area in early spring with a sharp spade, sifting all rhizomes by hand. Cover with heavy black plastic for 2 full seasons. Plant nothing in that location for a year after removal. Even with all of this, you should expect emergence in year 3 from rhizome fragments you missed. If you want a fragrant shade ground cover without the regret, consider sweet woodruff Gallium odoratum. It is also a spreader, but the rhizomes are shallow and easy to pull, and the plant is not toxic. Sweet woodruff is what I would have planted in 1987 if I had known then what I know now. Plume poppy, Macleia cordata, Usta zones 3 through 8, full sun to part shade, moist well-drained soil. Statuesque 8-foot stems with large blue-green lobed leaves and feathery cream-colored flower plumes in summer. Sold as a back-of-the-border statement plant. I will tell you a small story on myself. In 1990, I attended a perennial plant conference in Burlington and saw a single specimen of Macleia cordata at the demonstration garden. It was magnificent, silvery foliage, dramatic height, and architectural presence. I asked the conference horticulturist if it was difficult. She said, vigorous. I bought 3 of them at the conference plant sale and planted them in a row at the back of my deepest perennial border. By 1993, the 3 plants had become a single colony of perhaps 30 stems, 8 feet tall, occupying a stretch of border that had previously held a careful arrangement of phlox, baptisia, and Joe Pye weed. The Joe Pye, which is itself no shrinking violet, had been completely overrun. The phlox had been shaded out. The baptisia with its deep taproot was the only survivor. The spread is by underground stolons that travel laterally through the soil, sending up new shoots wherever they find an opening. Cutting the foliage does nothing. Digging only helps if you remove every fragment, which is impractical for a colony of this size. The taproot itself is shallow and easy to lift, but the lateral runners can extend 10 to 12 feet from the parent plant in mature stands. I once paid $40 per plant for plume poppy at a conference. Don't be Walt. The same plant is given away for free at perennial swaps every spring in my county, because anyone who has it is trying to get rid of it. If you want the dramatic presence of Macleia cordata without the regret, plant it inside a sunken container. A 55-gallon barrel with the bottom removed works, sunk so the rim is 2 inches above grade. The barrel will hold it for about 6 years before the stolons find a way over the top. Or skip Macleia entirely and use Aralia cordata Sun King for similar architectural impact without the running roots. Crown vetch, Securiger varia, formerly known as Coronilla varia. Usta zones 3 through 9, full sun, tolerates drought, tolerates poor soil, pink and white pea-like flowers in summer. Sold for decades by various nurseries and seed companies as an erosion control plant for slopes, banks, and roadside cuts. This is the plant my grandfather did not plant. Not because he was wise about crown vetch specifically, but because in 1936, when the Vermont State Highway Department was promoting crown vetch for roadside erosion control, he refused to plant anything the government recommended on general principle. That decision saved the back 5 acres of the orchard from a problem that took the neighboring farm 40 years to address. Crown vetch is a legume, which means it fixes nitrogen and grows in soil where most plants will not. That sounds positive until you understand what it does next. The vines sprawl horizontally up to 6 feet from the crown, rooting at the nodes wherever they touch soil. The colony expands annually, climbing over and smothering shorter grasses, wildflowers, and seedling trees. Once established, it is one of the most difficult perennials to eliminate from a property. A first-time gardener will encounter crown vetch in 2 ways. First, it is sometimes still sold as a wildflower seed for slopes in inexpensive seed mixes. Second, neighboring property owners may have planted it decades ago, and the colony may now be advancing onto your land. Pause this video for a moment if you have a steep slope at the edge of your property. Go look at it. If you see a sprawling pink and white flowering legume colonizing the area, you have crown vetch. The USDA Invasive Plant Atlas lists it as invasive in the eastern United States. The Plant Conservation Alliance has it on the alert list. Most northeastern state extension services recommend against planting it for any purpose. Removal requires repeated mowing for at least 3 years, combined with manual pulling of seedlings. There is no easy shortcut. If your slope needs erosion control, plant native sedges, switchgrass, or little bluestem instead. They are slower to establish, but they do not eat the neighborhood. Chameleon plant, Houtuinia cordata, sometimes sold as variegata or chameleon for the tricolor red, yellow, and green foliage. Usta zones 4 through 11. Sun to shade, moist to wet soil. Sold as a colorful ground cover for shady wet spots where nothing else will grow. My opinion on Houtuinia cordata is the same opinion I hold for any plant that smells like rotten fish when crushed and that you cannot kill. It does not belong in a residential garden. The foliage is striking, I will grant that. The flowers are inconspicuous white spathes that nobody buys this plant for. People buy it for the colored leaves. They keep it for the colored leaves. And then they spend the rest of their gardening lives trying to remove it. The runners of Houtuinia cordata are among the most aggressive of any perennial commonly sold. They travel through the top 3 to 6 inches of soil in any direction. They are brittle and break easily, and every broken fragment regenerates into a new plant. Conventional digging makes the problem worse, not better. Tilling makes the problem catastrophically worse. I planted one nursery pot of variegated Houtuinia in 1996 in a shady, damp corner where I had been struggling to establish anything. By 1999, the colony had advanced 8 feet in all directions and had emerged in 3 locations beyond a paved walkway, having traveled underneath it. By 2004, I dedicated an entire weekend to digging out the colony and solarizing the area with black plastic for 2 seasons. It returned in year 3 from fragments I had missed. The smell when you handle the broken stems is unmistakable, a sharp, sour, fish-like odor that lingers on your gloves for hours. The University of Vermont Extension and most northeastern state extensions list it as a potentially invasive plant of concern. If you want colorful foliage in a damp shade situation, plant Brunera macrophylla Jack Frost for silvery heart-shaped leaves, or one of the variegated hostas. Both will give you visual interest without colonizing your county. Japanese anemone, Anemone times hybrida, sometimes sold under older names like Anemone japonica or Anemone tomentosa. Usta zones 4 through 8, with the colder end being marginal. Part shade, moist, well-drained soil, pink or white late summer flowers on tall, airy stems, sold as an elegant late-season perennial for cottage borders. My grandfather had a small clump of pink Japanese anemone growing in the protected southwest corner of the old farmhouse, planted by my great-grandmother sometime in the 1920s. For 4 generations, that clump stayed put, slowly expanding by about an inch a year, contained by the foundation on 2 sides and by lawn that my grandfather mowed weekly on the other 2. The lesson there is not that Japanese anemone is harmless. The lesson is that for 40 years, the conditions kept it in check. I planted my own Anemone times hybrida September charm in 1997, in a more open part shade location with rich moist soil and no mowing barrier. For the first 3 years, the plant did nothing. It sat there, it barely flowered. I almost dug it up, then it woke up. Beginning in year 4, the colony began expanding by 12 to 15 inches per year, sending out underground runners that emerged as new flowering stems wherever they found openings. By year 10, the colony had occupied a 30-square-foot area and had pushed into the crowns of 3 established hostas, displacing 2 of them entirely. By year 20, I had given up that section and reframed it as a late summer wildflower zone. The deceptive part of Japanese anemone is the slow establishment. Most first-time gardeners abandon it during the slow years and never see the regret. If you are patient enough to let it establish, you will be patient enough to dig it out for the rest of your gardening life. If you must have late summer flowers in part shade, consider the much better behaved Anemone hupahensis September charm on a strong root barrier, or skip the genus entirely and plant Tricertus hirta, toad lily, which spreads modestly and stops when it hits another root system. The 12th and final plant on this list is the one I have battled the longest, the one that survived every removal strategy I attempted, and the one I genuinely regret most. Ribbon grass. Phalaris arundinacea picta, also called reed canary grass when grown for forage. Usta zones 4 through 9, sun to part shade. Tolerates dry soil, moist soil, wet soil, periodic flooding. The variegated picta cultivar has striking green and cream striped foliage that catches light beautifully in the morning. That is the trap. Back when I taught soil science at UVM, I used Phalaris arundinacea as a teaching example for rhizomatous perennial root systems. We would dig a test pit in a stand of ribbon grass and trace a single rhizome system that, on more than one occasion, extended over 20 feet from the parent crown. The rhizomes are thick, white, branching, and run 6 to 12 inches below the surface. Every node along a rhizome can produce a new shoot. Every fragment as small as an inch can regenerate. I planted 3 pots of variegated ribbon grass in 1994 along the edge of a small pond at the back of my property. The catalog photograph showed it in a tidy clump, framing the water with ornamental grace. Within 2 seasons, the original 3 plants had merged. Within 4 seasons, the colony had expanded from the pond edge 10 feet up the slope and 10 feet along the bank. Within 7 years, ribbon grass had crossed a mowed strip of lawn and emerged in my established blueberry row, where the blueberry plants had been in the ground for over a decade. I tried mowing. I tried smothering with cardboard and 12 inches of mulch. I tried solarizing with black plastic for 2 full growing seasons. I tried, and this is the part I am not proud of, a targeted herbicide application in 2001 that I would not repeat today. The ribbon grass came back from rhizome fragments in every single case. What finally began to work around 2018 was a combination of techniques applied with patience. First, repeated cutting of the foliage at ground level every 2 weeks throughout the entire growing season. This exhausts the rhizome reserves over time. Second, deep edging with a sharp flat spade around the perimeter every spring, severing any rhizomes that had advanced beyond the established colony. Third, replacing the surrounding lawn with thick mulched garden beds that I could monitor closely for any shoots emerging at the edges. Fourth, accepting that complete elimination might never happen, but containment was achievable. The honest truth about ribbon grass is that the USDA Invasive Plant Atlas lists Phalaris arundinacea as invasive in wetlands across the northern United States. 46 states list it as an ecological concern. It is one of the most aggressive cool-season grasses in North America. The Picta cultivar, despite the variegation, is the same species with the same root system and the same ecological impact. Variegation does not change botany. Mount Cuba Center's research on ornamental grasses identified several native alternatives that provide similar visual interest without the regret. Northern sea oats, Chasmanthium latifolium, gives you graceful arching seed heads. Little bluestem Schizocurium scoparium provides clumping height and stunning fall color. Bottlebrush grass, Elymus hystrix, offers unusual seed spikes for shaded areas. None of these grasses spread by rhizome. All of them stop where you plant them. If you take only one lesson from this video, take this one. Before you plant any perennial, especially any grass, read the word spreads by rhizomes on the label or in the catalog description. If you see those words, put the plant back. Look for clumping or non-spreading. Those words are the difference between a garden you control and a garden that controls you. I planted ribbon grass in 1994. I am still managing it in 2026. That is 32 growing seasons of work to undo a single afternoon of planting. The plant doesn't read the label, but you can. And after watching this video, I hope you will. That is the list. 12 perennials I bought, planted, and have regretted across 41 growing seasons in this same Vermont soil. My opinion after all of these years is not that perennials are dangerous or that gardening is a trap. My opinion is that the garden industry sells convenience and beauty and tells the truth about neither. The plants that are easiest to grow at a wholesale nursery are often the plants that are hardest to control in a residential yard. The plants that look most impressive on a catalog page are often the plants that will eat the page next to them and the page after that. Heritage sprouts, what I'm asking you to do is this. Before you buy any perennial, look it up on the USDA Invasive Plant Atlas at invasiveplantatlas.org. Check the University of Vermont Extension website or the Extension Service in your own state. Cornell, Rutgers, Penn State, the University of Minnesota, whichever serves your zone. Read the trial garden reports from Mount Cuba Center if the plant is a native species. Spend 5 minutes doing this research and you will avoid 5 decades of regret. I'd love to hear from you. Drop the worst perennial you ever planted in the comments below and the zone you garden in. I read every comment and I learn from your stories. Some folks plant, others put plants in the ground. Different sports entirely. I want all of us doing the first one with eyes open. Subscribe if you found this useful. Next week, we'll cover the 12 perennials I'd plant again in a heartbeat. The ones that earned their place across 40 winters and 4 generations on this Vermont hillside. Until then, this has been Walt Holloway signing off from the back porch of the old Holloway place.